There was something in the air that afternoon, a tension that could be felt in every detail, from the uncomfortable silence to the glances we avoided exchanging. I wasn't exactly sure what was to come, but a part of me longed for the unknown and the dangerous. Classroom was empty except for me and him, the teacher. I had stayed behind to clear up some doubt, but the heavy atmosphere made it seem as though we both knew that was just an excuse. He approached, with that look that always disarmed me, a mixture of authority and something else, something I never had the courage to name. "So, what didn't you understand?" he asked, his voice firm but with a certain softness that kept my senses on high alert. As I tried to form a coherent answer, I felt the heat rise through my body. We were alone, and the space between us was too small to ignore the woody scent of his cologne and the tension hanging in the air. My hands trembled slightly as I held the notebook, and he noticed. "Are you okay?" Question sounded genuine, but there was something behind his words, an intentionality that left me breathless. "Yes," my voice came out low, almost a whisper. He leaned in, and I could feel the heat of his presence even closer. Tips of his fingers brushed lightly against my hand as if by accident, but we both knew it wasn't. A brief touch, almost insignificant, but it made my skin prickle. "Are you sure? You seem distracted today." The tone of his voice carried a hidden meaning, a subtle invitation for something more. I looked at him, and for a moment we stayed like that, caught in a silent game of provocation and desire. My legs were crossed, and the short skirt I was wearing dangerously crept up above my knees. I couldn't help but notice how his eyes quickly slid down my legs before returning to my face. "Maybe I need a more detailed explanation," I murmured, surprised by the courage my own voice carried. He gave a slight smile, as if he knew exactly where this was heading. He moved even closer, standing by my side, and the heat from his body seemed to radiate onto me, setting fire to every coherent thought I could have. Closeness made our shoulders subtly touch, and each small contact felt like pure electricity running through my skin. Detailed how? He tilted his head, his lips dangerously close to my ear, and the tone of his voice was almost a teasing whisper. My breath involuntarily quickened, and my body reacted before I could stop it. My heart was racing, and the air seemed too dense to breathe easily. He noticed, of course he noticed. It was part of the game he seemed to play so well. "I think I'll need a practical demonstration." My words came out almost without thinking, but filled with an intention I could no longer deny. He pulled back slightly, just to look me in the eyes, evaluating whether what he had just heard was real. And when he realized I wouldn't back down, he leaned in again, this time with a clear intention. Our lips met, first gently, then with more intensity, as if all the repressed desire had finally found an escape. His hands slid down my arms to my waist, pulling me closer. Contact of our skin, even through the clothes, was enough to ignite every part of my being. His firm hands explored my curves, while my fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him even closer. The outside world ceased to exist. There was nothing but the heat of his lips on mine, the way his body molded to mine, and the overwhelming sensation of finally surrendering to that forbidden desire. Touches became bolder, the caresses more intense, and every second seemed to carry the promise of more. I knew this was dangerous, knew we were crossing a line that should never be crossed. But deep down, perhaps that was exactly what made it even more irresistible. The forbidden, the tense, the sensual, and the certainty that from then on, nothing would ever be the same. For a brief moment, the sound of footsteps in the hallway brought me back to reality. I pulled away from him, trying to catch my breath and organize my thoughts, but the effect he had on me still kept me on high alert. His eyes remained fixed on me, reading each of my reactions. "Don't worry. We're alone here," he said with a calmness that almost made me smile, as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. "Maybe I should go," I tried to say, but my voice didn't sound convincing, not even to myself. "Or maybe you should stay a little longer." He moved closer again, slowly, with that firm, confident look that left me defenseless. His words weren't just an invitation, they were a promise that it wouldn't end there. The heat between us intensified again, and I knew there was no turning back. Every small gesture, Every exchanged glance carried the tension of those who knew they were playing with fire, but refused to stop. He touched my hand once more, this time firmly, guiding me toward the desk nearby. I could feel my heart racing with every passing second, while the adrenaline mixed with desire took control of me. "Do you still want that detailed explanation?" he asked, his voice husky, full of intention. Everything in me screamed that I should pull back, but at the same time the idea of continuing was too irresistible to ignore. There was a dangerous freedom in that moment, a feeling of being on the verge of crossing a forbidden boundary and never coming back. "Yes, Professor," I answered, almost not recognizing my own voice, hoarse and full of repressed desire. He slid his fingers along my arm, slowly moving up to touch my face, holding my chin gently. His eyes were fixed on mine, evaluating every reaction, every sign of hesitation that might appear. But I didn't pull back. On the contrary, I leaned my face toward his, allowing the next kiss to be even deeper and more intense. His hands explored my back, sliding down the curve of my waist while I held onto his shoulders, feeling the warmth emanating from his body. The desk behind me provided a firm support when he gently lifted me, sitting me there with ease. My legs instinctively opened to accommodate him between them, and the contact of our bodies became inevitable. Kisses grew more urgent, our heavy breaths filling the silence of the room. I could feel every tense muscle of his against my body, each touch sending waves of pleasure through me like fire. His hands slid to my thighs, and the thin fabric of my skirt seemed almost useless against the intensity of the moment. "This is crazy," I murmured, trying to catch my breath but not pushing him away. "Maybe it is." He smiled, that smile mixing malice and confidence. "But do you still want to stop?" I shook my head in denial, unable to form any response other than to give in to what we were feeling. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. Here, in this moment, there was only the two of us and the overwhelming desire consuming us. Classroom, which had once seemed cold and impersonal, was now the setting for something forbidden, intense, and unforgettable. Each touch, each kiss reaffirmed that we had crossed a line with no return, and that both of us were willing to face the consequences. The room was immersed in an almost palpable stillness, a stillness that, instead of bringing comfort, only heightened the tension. The warmth of the room seemed to reflect the atmosphere between us, and the light breeze entering through the window seemed to do nothing to ease the growing pressure. The silence was almost deafening, interrupted only by our accelerated breathing, marking the rhythm of an untold song but clearly felt. I could feel my entire body responding to his, each of my movements guided by the magnetism of his presence. His eyes, those eyes that seemed to read every unspoken thought, continued to analyze me with an intensity one couldn't escape. With every passing second, the sensation of vulnerability mixed with a strange confidence. I knew I was in dangerous territory, but I also knew that he was the kind of man who knew how to guide those willing to follow. The lightness of the moment grew increasingly uncertain, and I found myself torn between the desire to completely surrender to that impulse and the fear of the consequences that would follow. But his gaze, deep and penetrating, seemed to assure that any doubts I had had no place there. He was determined, and his power of persuasion was undeniable. "Are you okay, or do you want me to stop?" he whispered, his lips almost touching my ear. His voice was low, but there was a firmness in it, a control that contrasted with the whirlwind of emotions running through me. My legs instinctively wrapped around him, and my body arched in response to his touch, seeking something more. Something I didn't know what was, but my body demanded. My heart raced out of sync, and the tension in my back intensified with each of his movements. He was still there, so close yet so distant. It was as if every inch of space between us was another provocation. I looked at him, his eyes glowing with a mix of authority and desire. I knew he was waiting for a response, waiting to see how far I was willing to go. There was no turning back. The line between what was right and what was forbidden had already been irrevocably crossed. "Don't stop." The words escaped my mouth without thinking, with an intensity that surprised me. He smiled as if he had anticipated my response, and then leaned in once more. His lips met mine, this time with more urgency, more need. Kiss was deep, exploratory, as if we were trying to unravel each other with every touch. He pulled my waist closer, and I could feel the hardness of his body against mine, every muscle tense, as if he too were trying to control himself but at the same time couldn't hold back any longer. His hands, once so firm and controlled, began to move more freely, bolder. They traveled down to the curve of my waist, exploring my skin beneath the fabric of my blouse, and the sensation of his touch burned like fire. I surrendered to the moment, to his touches, to the way he seemed to guide me with a confidence I didn't know existed within me. Every gesture from him made me want more, made me desire to go further, to cross all the limits I had set for myself. The feeling of being completely dominated by him, and at the same time of willingly giving myself up, made me feel a mix of excitement and fear. He knew exactly what to do, and I could no longer pretend that I wasn't completely involved in this dangerous game. Every touch of his ignited a flame inside me, and I knew that if we continued, it wouldn't be easy to turn back. His fingers moved up my skin, challenging the clothes that separated our bodies, and the tension between us grew with each passing second. The room seemed smaller, and the air denser, as if the space around us was compressing, focusing all attention on the two of us. There was no more world outside, nothing but those caresses, that touch. "You're so intense," he whispered, and his words almost disarmed me. His tone was filled with desire, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was a hint of adoration or even possessiveness. And that made me want more. More from him, more of that surrender. My hands moved involuntarily to his hair, pulling him closer to me as if I could no longer resist. Kiss became more urgent, and his caresses more intense. I knew what this meant. I knew we were moving into a territory that, once crossed, would have no return. But in that moment, it seemed irrelevant. "You'll regret this," I said, unable to hold back the smile forming on my lips. It was a threat, but also a provocation. I knew he wouldn't take me seriously. I knew he was just as immersed in the desire as I was. He chuckled softly, a rough sound full of malice, and pulled away for a moment, just enough to look me in the eyes. His eyes were full of something else. Something I couldn't identify, but could feel every second we spent there between us. "I never regret," he said, his voice filled with certainty. And then he pulled me back into a kiss, deeper, more intense. The world around us disappeared, and there was nothing but what we felt in that moment. Classroom, which once seemed like a simple learning environment, now became the stage for something much bigger, much more dangerous, and at the same time utterly irresistible. With every touch, every whisper, every gesture, the tension built, and I knew we were about to reach the point of no return. But in truth, I didn't want to turn back. I didn't want it to end because somehow everything that was happening felt like part of something I no longer knew if I could control. The desire mixed with the need to explore more, to understand how far we could go. I knew he was ready to go deeper, and I, in some way, was too. This moment, the line between right and wrong had become too thin to see. And I didn't want to see it. Now that you know the truth, what would you do in her place? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your thoughts. Your interaction is very important. If you enjoyed this intense and captivating story, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories full of tension, forbidden romance, and desire. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.